I adopted the oldest, sickest dog in the shelter. What he did 3 months later stopped an entire park. This morning, I woke up and checked my phone like I always do. But today was different. Today, there were 47,000 notifications. A video of me and a gray-blue pit bull in a local park had gone viral overnight. In it, the dog, barely able to walk just weeks ago, stands on his shaking back legs and wraps his paws around my shoulders in what can only be described as a hug. People were calling it a miracle. They were calling it staged. They were calling it the most heartbreaking thing they'd ever seen. But they don't know what I know. They don't know about the 3 hours. They don't know about the red stamp. They don't know about the 2 a.m. drive with Max's lungs filling with fluid while I prayed to a God I'd stopped believing in. Let me take you back to where this all started. Yesterday, I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of Riverside Animal Shelter, and there was a 67-pound, gray, blue, and white pit bull sleeping against my lap. His name was Max. His head rested heavy against my stomach. His breathing was slow, labored, but steady. Maybe the first peaceful breath he'd taken in years. 3 hours ago, this dog was scheduled to die at 5 p.m. Nobody wanted him. In the 8 months he'd been at the shelter, 89 people had walked past his kennel. 89. They'd see the medical file, thicker than a phone book, listing the tumors, the cataracts, the arthritis that made his back legs tremble when he tried to stand. They'd see the gray muzzle, the cloudy eyes, the body that looked like it had already given up. And they'd keep walking toward the puppies in the front, the young dogs with wagging tails, the adoptable ones. Max had learned he was invisible. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not even particularly good with animals. I live alone in a cavernous apartment that still echoes with the absence of someone who used to fill it. I went to the shelter that day because I needed dog food for... Actually, that's a lie. I don't even have a dog. I went because I couldn't stand another Saturday alone in that apartment, staring at walls that had watched me become a ghost of myself. I was just browsing. That's what I told myself, just looking. But then I saw the medical hold section, the back corner where they keep the ones that won't make it out alive. And there he was. Max wasn't barking like the others, wasn't throwing himself at the kennel door, begging to be seen. He was curled up on the cold concrete, taking up as little space as possible, like he'd already accepted his fate, like he was just waiting. There was a kennel card zip-tied to the chain link. At the top, stamped in red ink, urgent. Below that, in smaller print, euthanasia scheduled 5 p.m. I checked my phone. It was 2:07. A volunteer named Sarah noticed me staring. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes that had seen too many dogs like Max come and go. That's Max, she said quietly, like she was introducing me to someone at a funeral. He's been here a while. What's wrong with him? I asked, even though I could see the tumors pressing against his thin skin, the milky film over his eyes. Sarah pulled out a clipboard. Advanced tumors throughout his abdomen and chest, bilateral cataracts, stage 4 arthritis. His previous owner passed away suddenly, heart attack, and the family didn't want to deal with the medical bills. They estimated he'd need about $5,000 in immediate care just to be comfortable. She paused. The shelter can't afford that, and at his age, we have to make difficult decisions. How old is he? 13. That's ancient for a pit bull his size. I stood there looking at this dog that the world had decided wasn't worth saving. And something happened inside me that I still don't fully understand. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be looked at and immediately dismissed, to take up as little space as possible and hope nobody notices when you disappear. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I just needed something to save because I couldn't save myself. How long does he have? I asked. Sarah glanced at her watch. They're coming at 5. I checked mine again. 2:14 p.m., 2 hours and 46 minutes. I want to adopt him, I heard myself say. Sarah blinked. Ben, are you sure? He's not going to last long. The vet gave him maybe 2 weeks, and that's with aggressive pain management. I don't care. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be heartbreaking. You're going to fall in love with him and then open the cage. What happened in the next 60 seconds, I'm not exaggerating, changed everything about who I thought I was. When Sarah unlocked that kennel door, nothing happened at first. Max didn't move, didn't lift his head. The other dogs in nearby kennels were barking, jumping, doing everything they could to be chosen instead. But Max just lay there, like he'd been passed over so many times that hope had become a stranger. I stepped inside the kennel and knelt down on that cold concrete beside him. And slowly, so slowly it hurt to watch, Max lifted his head just a few inches off the floor. And he looked at me, not with excitement, not with the desperate energy of a dog begging for a second chance, but with something quieter, something that looked like tired acceptance mixed with the faintest flicker of confusion, as if he was asking, "Why are you here? Don't you know I'm not worth it?" I reached out my hand and he didn't pull away. He just let me rest my palm on his head, between his clouded eyes. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're coming home with me." Behind me, I heard Sarah's breath catch. When I turned around, she was crying. 20 minutes later, after signing papers I barely read and ignoring warnings I should have listened to, I carried Max to my truck. He was heavier than he looked, 67 pounds of muscle and tumor and bone that hadn't been held gently in God knows how long. I set him in the back seat, expecting him to curl up in the corner like he had in the kennel, but he didn't. Instead, Max crawled across the seat, climbed into my lap as I sat there behind the wheel, and rested his heavy head against my stomach. And for the first time since I'd seen him, his entire body relaxed. I took out my phone and snapped a picture, the yellow arrow I'd later add pointing to his peaceful face, because I knew I needed to remember this moment, the moment when two invisible souls finally saw each other. I didn't know it then, but that photograph would eventually reach millions of people. It would spark a global movement for senior dog rescue. It would connect me to strangers who understood what it meant to choose the unchosen. But in that moment, sitting in a shelter parking lot with a dying dog in my lap, all I knew was this. I had just made a decision that didn't make sense to anyone. Not to Sarah, not to the vet, not even to me. But it was the first decision in 3 years that made me feel like I was still alive. Max fought for every second of his life when no one believed he was worth it. If his story made you feel something, don't just watch and leave. Hit that subscribe button. Be the voice for the ones who can't speak. One click, that's all it takes. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these incredible stories reach. Let me tell you about the version of me that walked into that shelter. The one who thought he was just killing time on a Saturday afternoon. I didn't need dog food. I've never owned a dog in my life. What I needed was an excuse to leave my apartment, to be around living things that didn't remind me of everything I'd lost. My therapist had suggested volunteering, getting involved in the community, finding purpose outside of work. I'd nodded and smiled and never followed through. But that Saturday morning, I woke up to silence so thick it felt like drowning, and I remembered there was an animal shelter 15 minutes away. I told myself I'd just look around. Maybe donate some old blankets, be a good person for an hour and feel slightly less empty. That was 4 hours ago. Now I'm sitting in my truck with a dying dog in my lap, and I can't remember the last time I felt this present, this here. Max's breathing has deepened into something that sounds almost like contentment, his massive head a warm weight against my stomach. Every few minutes, his paw twitches in his sleep, chasing something in a dream. I wonder when the last time was that he felt safe enough to dream. I check my phone. 5:23 p.m. 23 minutes past the time they would have taken him to the back room. 23 minutes past the moment he would have stopped existing. If I'd arrived an hour later, if I decided to stay home and to stare at my walls, if I'd walked past the medical hold section like everyone else did, Max would be gone. Not sleeping, not dreaming, just gone, erased. Another statistic in a shelter system that has to make impossible choices every single day. The paperwork Sarah gave me sits on the passenger seat. I haven't looked at it yet. I know what it says. Estimated life expectancy, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Required medications, 7 different prescriptions. Emergency vet contact information highlighted in yellow. A waiver I signed acknowledging that I understood this was a hospice adoption, that I was taking home a dog who would likely die before I learned all his quirks and preferences. But sitting here with him, feeling his chest rise and fall against me, I realized something that should terrify me but doesn't. I didn't go to that shelter to adopt a dog. I went because I needed a reason to keep going. I went because my apartment had become a tomb and I was slowly becoming a ghost inside it. I went because after my divorce, after my wife took everything that made our house a home, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. And now I'm driving away with a soul that was minutes from being erased. A soul that nobody wanted. A soul that looked at me with those cloudy eyes and saw something worth trusting one more time. I stroked Max's head gently, careful to avoid the tumor pressing against his left ear. "We're going home, buddy," I whisper. "You're home now." He doesn't wake up, doesn't lift his head or acknowledge my words, but his tail, that thick, scarred tail, gives one small thump against the seat. And just like that, I'm not alone anymore. The apartment I'm bringing Max to isn't much. It's a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that smells like old carpet and other people's cooking. I've lived here for 11 months, ever since Rebecca sat me down at our kitchen table, the one we picked out together at that antique store in Portland, and told me she couldn't do this anymore. This being us, this being our marriage, this being the life we'd carefully constructed over 7 years. She didn't yell. There was no dramatic fight, no thrown dishes or slammed doors. That might have been easier, actually. Instead, she just looked tired. Tired of waiting for me to be present. Tired of competing with a job that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Tired of sleeping next to someone who'd forgotten how to let anyone in. "You've built a wall, Ben," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't think you even know you're behind it anymore." She was gone by the end of the month. Took the couch, the good coffee maker, the frame photos from our trip to Maine, the plants she'd spent years keeping alive. Left me with a dining table I never used, a bed that felt too big, and silence that pressed against my eardrums like water pressure. I thought I'd get used to it. The silence. People do, don't they? People live alone all the time, and they're fine. They thrive even. But every morning I'd wake up and the first thing I'd notice was the absence of sound. No coffee brewing, no shower running, no humming while she got ready for work. Just the hollow echo of my own breathing in a space that had become a museum of everything I'd failed to protect. I stopped inviting friends over, stopped answering texts that asked how I was doing, started taking on extra shifts at work because at least there, the silence meant I was focused, productive, valuable. At home, the silence just meant I was alone. I'd come back from 10-hour days and stand in the kitchen, looking at takeout menus I'd already memorized, trying to remember if I'd eaten lunch. Most nights I'd skip dinner entirely, just sit on the floor with my back against the wall. Rebecca's wall, the one she'd painted sage green because she said it made the room feel calm, and scroll through my phone until my eyes burned. The therapist I saw exactly 3 times called it depression. I called it Tuesday. By month 6, I'd stopped pretending I was going to fix myself. Stopped believing that one day I'd wake up and feel human again. I'd accepted that this was just what my life was now, a holding pattern, breathing without living, existing without mattering. The wall Rebecca talked about, I didn't just build it, I'd moved in, made it my home, convinced myself I was safer there, until today, until a dying dog with clouded eyes looked at me and cracked something open I thought I'd sealed shut forever. I almost didn't see him. That's what haunts me now. I was already halfway through the shelter, already planning my exit. I'd walk past the cheerful dogs in the front kennels, the ones with volunteers standing nearby selling their stories to potential adopters. This is Bella. She's great with kids. Max here loves to play fetch. Luna just needs someone to give her a chance. But I kept moving toward the back. Maybe because the noise was quieter there. Maybe because I recognized something in those forgotten corners that felt familiar. The medical hold section wasn't marked with any official sign. You just knew it when you saw it. The kennels were different back there. Smaller, darker, lined up along a cinder block wall that someone had tried to brighten with a coat of yellow paint that only made everything feel sadder. The dogs here weren't performing, weren't jumping or barking or trying to sell themselves. They'd already learned that hope was expensive and they couldn't afford it anymore. That's when I saw the red stamp. It was on a kennel card zip-tied to the chain-link fence, about eye level. The word urgent in all capitals, stamped in red ink so bright it looked wet. Below it, handwritten in blue pen, euthanasia scheduled 5 p.m. today. And below that, a name, Max. I looked past the card into the kennel. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I saw him, curled up in the back corner on a thin blanket that had been blue once, his gray-blue coat making him almost invisible against the concrete. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, just staring at nothing, like he was already practicing being gone. Sarah appeared at my elbow. I hadn't heard her approach. "That's Max," she said, and something in her voice told me she'd already mourned him. He came in 8 months ago. Owner died suddenly, heart attack, at 53 years old. Dropped dead in his kitchen while Max was lying at his feet. I couldn't look away from the dog in the corner. The family didn't want him, Sarah continued. Said he was too expensive to keep. He's got tumors, cataracts, arthritis. The vet estimated about $5,000 just to make him comfortable. Not even to cure anything, just comfortable. She paused. They brought him here and never looked back. Didn't even say goodbye to him. 8 months, I repeated. 89 people have walked past him. We tried everything. Reduced adoption fee, social media posts, reaching out to breed-specific rescues. No one wants a 13-year-old dog with a terminal diagnosis. She looked at her clipboard, then back at Max. We're out of time. Out of space. We have 6 puppies coming in tomorrow from a hoarding situation. I stepped closer to the kennel. Max didn't move. Didn't even turn his head to acknowledge me. He's given up, Sarah said quietly. I think he knows. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was a dog who'd lost everything. His home, his person, his purpose, and was still here. Still breathing. Still taking up his small corner of space, even though the world had decided he didn't deserve it. I saw myself. I want to adopt him. The words came out before I'd even finished thinking them. Sarah turned to look at me, her eyes widening slightly like I just said something in a language she didn't expect me to speak. "Ben," she started, and I could hear the kindness wrapped around the warning. "I need you to understand what you're saying. Max isn't a normal adoption. This is hospice care. I understand." "No, I don't think you do." She pulled the clipboard against her chest. Protective. "The vet bills alone could run $5,000, and that's just to manage his pain. That's not counting emergency visits, which are almost guaranteed. He could have weeks or he could have days. You're going to spend thousands of dollars on a dog who's going to break your heart." I looked back at Max. He still hadn't moved. Hadn't even registered that we were talking about him. deciding his fate while he lay there in his corner, waiting for whatever came next. How much time does he have? I asked. Right now, before they come. Sarah checked her watch. About 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours, 150 minutes, 9,000 seconds. That's what remained between Max and permanent erasure. I thought about my apartment, about the silence waiting for me there, about how I'd been counting down my own clock for 11 months without even realizing it. What happens if I don't take him? I asked, even though I already knew. Ben, what happens? She looked down at the clipboard. At 5 o'clock, someone from the county comes. They take him to the back room. It's peaceful. He won't feel anything. It's the most humane option we have when nobody wants them. When we don't have space, she corrected gently. When we have to make impossible choices. I nodded, swallowed against something sharp in my throat. Get the paperwork. You need to think about this. Sleep on it. Come back tomorrow and... He doesn't have tomorrow. I turned to face her fully. You said it yourself. 5 o'clock. I'm not coming back tomorrow to find out I was 2 hours too late because I needed to sleep on it. Sarah studied my face for a long moment. Behind us, a beagle in one of the front kennels started barking, a sound full of hope and hunger for attention. Max didn't make a sound. The 2-week estimate, Sarah said quietly. That's optimistic. Dr. Reynolds said it could be less. Said his tumors are advanced enough that any day now, something could just give out. You could spend $5,000 and have him for 3 days. I don't care about the money. You should care about the heartbreak. I'm already heartbroken, I said, and the truth of it surprised me. I've been heartbroken for almost a year. At least this time it'll be for something that matters. Sarah's eyes got glassy. She blinked fast, professional mask slipping. You're sure? I looked at Max one more time, at the red stamp on his kennel card, at the body that had been discarded by the people who should have loved him most, at the tired acceptance in the way he held himself, like he'd already made peace with being forgotten. I'm sure. She nodded and started walking toward the front office. I'll get the forms. Max smelled like the shelter. That's the first thing I noticed when I carried him up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. Industrial disinfectant mixed with something sadder, the smell of too many scared animals in too small a space, of bleach trying to cover up things that couldn't be covered up. He was heavier than I expected, 67 pounds of dead weight in my arms, because he couldn't manage the stairs on his arthritic legs. By the second landing, my shoulders were burning. By the third, I was sweating through my shirt. But I didn't put him down. Inside, the apartment felt different with him in it. Less like a tomb, more like a space waiting to be filled. I'd stopped at a pet store on the way home. The kind of big chain store that smells like bird seed and aquarium filters. And panic bought $300 worth of supplies. An orthopedic dog bed, stainless steel bowls, senior dog food the clerk recommended, pain medication the shelter vet had prescribed, a soft collar because Max's neck was rubbed raw from years of wearing cheap nylon. I set him down gently in the living room, and he stood there for a moment on shaking legs, looking around at his new surroundings with those clouded eyes. Not exploring, just existing in the space. Then he walked, slow, deliberate, painful, to the corner near the window and lay down on the carpet. Not on the $100 orthopedic bed I'd placed in the center of the room, on the floor, in the corner, taking up as little space as possible. Max, I said softly, the bed's right here, buddy. He didn't move, just rested his head on his paws and closed his eyes. I tried to coax him onto the bed, even dragged it over to his corner, but he wouldn't budge. And watching him lie there on the hard carpet, I understood. He'd spent 8 months on concrete and cold floors. He'd been trained by abandonment to expect nothing soft, nothing comfortable. He didn't know how to trust that the bed was his, that he was allowed to take up space. So I made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. I grabbed my pillow and a blanket from my bedroom and set them up on the couch, 6 feet away from Max's corner, close enough that he could see me, close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. The apartment was quiet that first night, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not empty, not hollow, just peaceful. Around midnight, I heard Max shift position, his tags jingling softly against his new collar. I opened my eyes and saw him watching me in the darkness, his head raised slightly off his paws. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His head lowered back down. I lay there on my couch, uncomfortable and cramped, neck already protesting the angle of the armrest. Thought about my bedroom down the hall with its two big bed and sage green walls. Thought about how, for 11 months, I'd slept alone in that room, wrapped in silence that felt like suffocation. And I realized something. For the first time since Rebecca left, I didn't want to be anywhere else. Didn't want to be alone. This broken down couch, 6 feet from a dying dog I'd known for 6 hours. This was exactly where I needed to be. I closed my eyes and listened to Max breathe. And somehow, impossibly, I fell asleep. The sound woke me at 2:17 a.m. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A wet, rattling noise coming from Max's corner, like something was caught in his throat. I sat up on the couch, disoriented, my neck stiff from the awkward angle. In the darkness, I could see Max's silhouette. He was sitting up, his head lowered, sides heaving. Then I heard it again. That terrible rattle followed by a gasping sound that didn't belong in any living thing. I was across the room in seconds, my hands finding him in the dark. His whole body was trembling. Hot, too hot. And with each breath came that horrifying wet sound, like he was trying to breathe through water. "Max, Max, buddy, I'm here." My voice came out panicked, shaking. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight. What I saw made my stomach drop. His gums were pale, almost gray. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. And every breath was a battle. His chest expanding too much, his mouth open wide, tongue out, fighting for air that wouldn't come. Bacterial pneumonia. The words appeared in my head like someone had spoken them. The shelter vet had mentioned it as a risk. His immune system is compromised. Watch for respiratory distress. This was respiratory distress. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just scooped Max up, all 67 pounds of him, and ran for the door. Down 3 flights of stairs, my arms screaming in protest, Max's head lolling against my chest. Each breath he took sounded like drowning, like dying. The emergency vet clinic was 12 minutes away. I made it in 7. I don't remember most of that drive. Just fragments. The steering wheel slippery under my sweating palms. Running 2 red lights because stopping felt like giving up. Max in the passenger seat, propped against the door because he couldn't hold himself up anymore. That sound, that awful rattling sound, filling the truck cab like a countdown. "Stay with me," I kept saying. "Max, stay with me. We're almost there. Just stay." I didn't know if he could hear me. Didn't know if he was even conscious. But I kept talking anyway because the alternative was silence. And silence meant I was alone again. And I couldn't be alone again. Not after 6 hours of knowing what it felt like to matter to someone. The clinic parking lot was empty except for 1 car. I burst through the doors carrying Max, and a vet tech looked up from her computer, her eyes going wide. "He can't breathe," I said, and my voice broke. "Please, he can't breathe." She was already moving, calling for the doctor, taking Max from my arms. He disappeared through a door marked treatment, and suddenly I was standing in the waiting room alone, my arms empty, my shirt soaked with Max's saliva, and my own sweat and tears. I didn't remember crying. I sank into one of those plastic waiting room chairs, put my head in my hands, and for the first time in 11 months, I prayed to a God I'd stopped believing in. Please, not yet. I just found him. Please don't take him yet. The clock on the wall said 2:34 a.m. I'd had Max for exactly 9 hours, and I was already losing him. Dr. Thompson came through the treatment room doors 43 minutes later. I was on my feet before she'd taken 2 steps, searching her face for answers I was terrified to hear. "He's stable," she said, and I felt my knees go weak. "For now." She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that comes from saving lives at 3 in the morning while the rest of the world sleeps. "What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Bacterial pneumonia. Aggressive. His lungs were filling with fluid faster than his body could handle." She pulled off her latex gloves, dropped them in a nearby bin. "We've got him on IV antibiotics, oxygen support, and fluids. His fever's coming down, but Ben—" She paused and I braced myself. "His immune system is severely compromised. The tumors, his age, the stress of everything he's been through. His body is trying to fight, but it doesn't have much left to fight with." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the next 24 hours are critical. If he makes it through tonight, if his body responds to the antibiotics, he has a chance. But if the infection spreads, if his organs start shutting down—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Can I see him?" Dr. Thompson studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." The recovery room was small and sterile, all stainless steel and bright lights that hummed overhead. Max was on a table in the center, an oxygen mask over his muzzle, IV lines running from both front legs. He looked so small under all that equipment, so fragile. His eyes were closed, his breathing still labored, but steadier than it had been in my truck. I pulled a stool up next to the table and sat down. My hand found the space between his shoulder blades, careful to avoid the IV lines, and I just rested it there. Warm. He was still warm. Still here. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have—" His tail moved. Just once. Just barely. A single weak thump against the metal table. But it was there. I looked up at Dr. Thompson, who was standing in the doorway. She was smiling, just slightly, like she'd seen something she hadn't expected to see. "That's a good sign," she said softly. "That means he's still in there, still fighting." I looked back down at Max, at this broken-down dog that everyone had written off, that the world had decided wasn't worth the trouble. And I realized something that should have been obvious from the moment I knelt beside his kennel at the shelter. He'd never stopped fighting. Not when his owner died, not when his owner's family abandoned him, not during 8 months in that cage waiting for someone who never came. Not even when they stamped that red urgent on his card and scheduled his exit from this world. He'd kept breathing, kept existing, kept taking up his small corner of space, and now with tubes in his legs and a mask on his face and a fever still burning through his body, he'd summoned enough strength to move his tail. To tell me he wasn't ready. To tell me we weren't done yet. "You're tougher than you look, buddy," I said, my voice thick. His tail thumped again, and I started to believe we might actually make it through the night. We made it through the night. And then we made it through the next one, and the one after that. Max came home from the emergency clinic 3 days later, still weak but breathing on his own. The apartment had transformed in his absence. I'd bought a second orthopedic bed, this one placed directly in the corner where he'd chosen to sleep that first night. I'd meal prepped his medications into labeled containers. I'd rearranged my entire life around his feeding schedule, his walking schedule, his existence. On the 5th day, I did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I took a photo and posted it online. It was nothing special. Just Max sleeping on his bed, finally trusting that soft things were allowed. The morning light coming through the window made his gray-blue coat look almost silver. I'd been staring at him for 20 minutes, watching his chest rise and fall, still half convinced that each breath might be his last. I created an Instagram account, typed in the first username that came to mind, at Max Second Chance. Uploaded the photo with a simple caption, Day 5. He's still here. We're still fighting. I didn't expect anyone to see it. Didn't expect anyone to care about an old sick dog that should have died a week ago. By that evening, I had 200 followers. By the next morning, 800. People I'd never met were commenting, sharing their own stories of senior dog rescues, of last chance adoptions, of the ones everyone said weren't worth saving. But the comment that stopped me cold came from someone named Mr. Harrison. I live in your building. 3B. I've seen you carrying him up the stairs. Can I meet him? Mr. Harrison knocked on my door the next afternoon. He was maybe 75, with white hair and hands that shook slightly when he extended one toward me. I'd seen him in the hallway before, always alone, always moving slowly, always looking like he was carrying something heavy that nobody else could see. I lost my dog last year, he said when I let him in. Cancer. Had her for 14 years. Haven't been able to even look at dogs since. He paused in the doorway, looking at Max sleeping in his corner. But I saw your post, and I needed to see him. Max lifted his head when Mr. Harrison approached. To my surprise, his tail thumped twice against the bed. Mr. Harrison knelt down, slowly, his knees protesting, and reached out a trembling hand. Max leaned into the touch, and something in the old man's face cracked open. He started crying. Just sat there on my floor, petting Max, tears running down his weathered cheeks. I forgot, he whispered. I forgot what this felt like. He came back the next day, and the day after that, would sit with Max for an hour, sometimes two, just stroking his head and talking to him in a soft voice about his own dog, about the silence in his apartment, about how he'd stopped believing that anything could fill it. The Instagram account grew. At Max's Second Chance became a community. People sent messages about dogs they'd adopted from shelters, about the seniors they'd given a final home to, about finding purpose in caring for something everyone else had discarded. And I started documenting it all. The small victories, Max standing without shaking, Max eating his full meal, Max following me from room to room instead of staying in his corner. The community grew because they saw themselves in our story, in the idea that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, that sometimes saving something else is how you save yourself. Max had given me more than companionship. He'd given me a reason to wake up. And in doing so, he'd given the same gift to hundreds of others. 3 months later, I did something I never thought I'd do again. I threw a tennis ball. We were at Riverside Park, the same park I used to walk through on my way home from work when I was still married, when I still believed my life was heading somewhere. I'd avoided it for almost a year because memory is a cruel thing, and that park held too many of them. But Max had been getting stronger. The tumors were still there. They'd always be there. But the pneumonia had cleared. His eyes were still clouded, but he could see shapes, movement, light. And his legs, those arthritic legs that had shaken so badly he could barely stand, had found strength I didn't know was possible. The 2-week life expectancy Dr. Thompson had given him, we'd blown past it, then past a month, then 2. So that Sunday morning, I brought Max to the park, brought a tennis ball I'd bought on impulse at the grocery store, not really believing he'd have the energy to chase it. I tossed it gently across the grass, maybe 10 feet. Max watched it arc through the air. His head tracked its movement, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't seen before. Interest, engagement, life. He walked toward the ball, not ran, but walked with purpose, picked it up in his mouth and brought it back to me. I stood there in shock. This bright yellow tennis ball covered in dog saliva held in Max's jaws, his tail wagging for what might have been the first time since I'd known him. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice catching. "Max, you amazing, incredible." And then he did something that stopped time. He dropped the ball, placed his front paws on my thighs, and slowly, shakily, pushed himself up on his back legs until his paws rested on my shoulders. He was hugging me. This dog who 3 months ago couldn't walk upstairs, who'd been hours away from euthanasia, who'd almost died in my arms from pneumonia. He was standing on his back legs, wrapping his paws around me, his head tucked against my neck. I wrapped my arms around him and held on. Around us, the park had gone quiet. Other dog owners had stopped what they were doing. A woman with a stroller had her hand over her mouth. Someone was filming on their phone, but I didn't care. All I cared about was this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment. "I love you," I whispered into his fur. "I love you so much." His tail thumped against my leg. Max lived for 7 more months after that day in the park. 7 months that the world told me we'd never have. The video of our hug went viral. 12 million views in 3 days. News outlets picked it up. At Max, Second Chance grew to over 200,000 followers. Donations flooded in for senior dog rescues across the country. Adoption rates for older dogs spiked. Max became a symbol for something bigger than both of us. Proof that the discarded, the forgotten, the not worth it still have value, still have love to give. But the real gift wasn't the viral video or the movement or the lives saved because of Max's story. The real gift was what happened in my apartment on an ordinary Tuesday evening in late autumn. Max was lying on his bed, the one he'd finally learned to trust, and I was sitting on the floor beside him, my hand resting on his side, feeling his breathing slow. He'd stopped eating 2 days before, stopped walking that morning. The vet had come to the apartment that afternoon and confirmed what I already knew. It was time. "Thank you," I whispered as his breasts grew further apart. "Thank you for choosing me back." His eyes found mine one last time, and in them, I didn't see pain or fear or regret. I saw peace. Max took his final breath at 6:47 p.m., in his own bed in his own home, surrounded by love. And I realized, sitting there with my hand on his still chest, that everyone had it backwards. I didn't save Max. Max saved me.